Thank you for listening to We Have Ways of Making You Talk. Sign up to our Patreon to receive bonus content, live streams, and our weekly newsletter with money off books and museum visits as well, plus early access to all live show tickets. That's patreon.com/wehaveways.
That's your money saying it's time for a McDonald's run. Because with new McValue at McDonald's, you get more than you expect. Like buy a 6-piece McNuggets and add a McChicken for just $1. Your money says let's go. Get more than you expect with new McValue. Prices and participation may vary. Valid for item of equal or lesser value.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Hey, Fidelity. What's it cost to invest with the Fidelity app?
Start with as little as $1 with no account fees or trade commissions on U.S. stocks and ETFs.
That's music to my ears.
I can only talk.
Investing involves risk, including risk of loss. Zero account fees apply to retail brokerage accounts only. Sell order assessment fee not included. A limited number of ETFs are subject to a transaction-based service fee of $100. See full list at fidelity.com/commissions. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC, member NYSE, SIPC.
Of all the horrors of the place, the smell perhaps was the most startling of all. It was a smell made up of all kinds of odours. Human excreta, foul bodily odours, smouldering trash fires, German tobacco, which is a stink in itself, all mixed together in a heavy, dank atmosphere, in the thick, muddy woods where little breeze could go. The ground was pulpy throughout the camp, churned to a consistency of warm putty by the milling of thousands of feet. Mud mixed with feces and urine. The smell of Gunskirchen nauseated many of the Americans who went there. It was a smell I'll never forget, completely different from anything I've ever encountered. It could almost be seen and hung over the camp like a fog of death. And that was Captain J.D. Pletcher of the 71st Division Headquarters. And welcome to We Have Ways of Making You Talk, Victory in Europe, Victory 45, Episode 4. And now that we're in Germany, and in our last 3 episodes, we've got across the Rhine, we've bust into Germany and the Allied armies, British, Canadian, American, and French, of course, as we lent into the last episode, are running rampant, and they are discovering the truth about the Third Reich. I think it's fair to say.
They are, and I'm afraid it's just unavoidable. You have to confront it, but we've got a bit of other stuff to talk about first. So let's introduce the 71st Infantry Division, because they're not a famous one. They're not the Rock of the Marne. They're not the Thunderbirds. They're not the big red one. They're not even the Golden Acorns. I mean... And they've only arrived in early part of 1945. And they fought through Alsace. Anyway, there's a chap I came across called Staff Sergeant Alan Moskin. He was an 18-year-old Jewish soldier from New Jersey in the 66th Infantry Regiment of the 71st Infantry Division. And he'd been drafted after high school.
Right.
And early 1945, so he has his training. His training is pretty rigorous, pretty tough and all the rest of it. Makes some buddies. But he's not aligned to a particular unit at this time. So in early 1945, he's sent overseas on a conveyor belt of replacements, lands at Liverpool, down on the train, down to the south coast, down on a boat, then over the channel to a Repel depot, which is a replacement depot. And from there, he's sent to join the 66th Infantry Regiment, part of the 71st Infantry Division, on the 11th of March near a place called Ratsvilla, which is in Alsace. And at the time, the 71st Division are just relieving the 100th Infantry Division.
Yeah.
So then on the 28th of March, the 71st Infantry Division is shifted. And that's the point where they join the Third Army. And they then cross the Rhine 2 days later. And it's interesting for him. It is absolute assault on the senses, a total shock to go from the comparative safety and security of training in the US and ships and camps and depots to suddenly finding yourself in action. He finds himself in action for the first time in Alsace. This is before the Rhine crossing, and he finds he experiences war for real when he's crouching down behind somewhere and suddenly something hurls over and hits him on the helmet and he's a bit dazed. And when he looks around, he realizes he's been hit by a human arm. And it's not just any old arm either. It's a arm of one of his buddies because he can recognize the tattoo on it.
Oh, it's like, I mean, that as a sort of barometer of horror, that will do, won't it? I mean, and that's like, that is like something out of a film, out of a horror film directly.
Yes.
Ghastly.
Not long after they get across the Rhine, he then comes up behind a disabled German tank. And although the Panzer's been knocked out, it's still firing, and the Panzer fires several rounds. But then Moskin and some of his fellows see one of the Germans' tank crew clamber out of the tank, and so he fires and sees the man fall. And soon after, they kind of overrun the position, and Moskin goes over to see the prostrate body of the man he's just shot. And the helmet has come off the soldier, and he's young and, similar age to him. He looks over and sees the helmet sort of nearby. Scattered inside the helmet is a photo, several photos, and one of them is of who are clearly his parents, and it says "Wer lieben dich, Mutti and Vati." Yeah. So, and he has nightmares about this.
I mean, the interesting thing with his stories are, you could pluck 10,000 people out of the American armies at the point, and they'd all have stories like this.
Yes.
The reason finding the guy's photographs with mum and dad, I mean, these are almost cliches, aren't they? The reason they're cliches is because they're happening absolutely everywhere to everyone. This is what it is. Recognizing your buddy's tattoo. It's really striking how these stories fall into a paradigm, but that's because that is what is happening to everybody.
That is what is happening. Yeah. And it's really grim, and it's this stage of the war. I mean, the war is always violent and always has been right from the opening shots, but there is something particularly grim, especially grim, about these final stages where it's also pointless, and all around you can just see Armageddon. I mean, this is post-apocalyptic stuff. There is carnage, death, burnt out stuff, rotting corpses, desolation, leaking sewers.
Yeah.
Skeletal landscape, mud, even into April. It's just an utter horror story. And it's also completely pointless. There's another time where his best buddy gets really, really badly wounded. He's bleeding out and he stops to help him. The sergeant comes along and orders him to leave him, abandon him, says, come on,
I've got to keep moving.
And he never, ever gets over having to leave his best friend.
Yeah.
So he's got quite a lot of trauma there.
It's bitter stuff. And he's interesting because he talks about fear as well, doesn't he? He says people are peeing their pants. There's nothing to be ashamed of. Everyone's scared. There's nothing abnormal about it. Replacements are coming in the spring of 1945. The war is as real in terms of men being killed and injured as it has at any other phase of the war. It isn't this thing of once you cross the Rhine, it's all kind of a picnic.
No.
It carries on as bitterly as it has before.
And there's lots of terrifying stuff. And this is a time when big forests and people jumping out of Panzerfaust and stuff, which we should get onto, because elsewhere I was always very struck by that essay by Paul Fussell.
Yeah.
He brutal fighting and lots of his buddies get killed, and he witnesses all sorts of horrors, and he reads the great big first account of the Second World War, and his division isn't even mentioned.
That's right.
So, that's why I'm kind of interested in, mentioning Alan Moskin and the 71st Infantry Division. But actually, Alan Moskin will come back, will return before the end of this episode. But meanwhile.
Yes, British Second Army pushing on into northern Germany. And they, as we said in the last episode, they are not to go to Berlin. We're basically on an axis towards Hamburg and Denmark.
Bremen.
Yeah, and Bremen. And they're being held up here and there, pockets of resistance. 30 Corps, for example, they turn north from Ries, where they cross the Rhine, and they go into Holland to start with, and then head for Bremen. And it is this business of every now and again, the set-piece battles are over, but you really don't know there's violence around the corner everywhere. People leaping out with Panzerfausts, training schools and all that sort of thing they run into where people, hang on.
Well, I remember following that route, and you do go through the old maps that they had. We had an old sort of 1 to 250,000 scale map that the British have been issued with, and it's basically the same. Yeah. So on the maps, you can see the big forest as a sort of dead straight Roman road going through the forest, linking. There's a town. The forest ends, then there's a village or a town, then there's another forest, then there's another town, and you can drive through these same forests, and you can just imagine the kind of the road, the big tree trunk across the road, and people jumping out and being the first in the column and being blasted and stuff. And no one wanted to be in the vanguard. No one wanted to be on point.
No.
But they are all making incredible, significant, and rapid progress. There's no getting away from that.
Yeah, because the Canadians break into the Netherlands, and their job is to sort of scoop round, isn't it, north
and cut back westwards to the the Dutch coast.
Yeah,
because there's still that large part of Holland which is sort of cut off.
Yeah,
but still garrisoned by the Germans.
Mm. So they get across the River Isel and they capture Apeldoorn and Zutphen as part of Operation Cannon Shot. Then on the 12th of April, Operation Anger, which is the 49th Polar Bears Division, who are attached to Canadian Second Corps. 4-day battle for the town, which is in Arnhem, which is, of course, empty because it's evacuated after Market Garden. That fighting goes on to the 16th of April. Often enough in books about Market Garden, you get the odd photo, which is actually from April. It's one of some lads with a 6-pounder in the shop window.
Yes.
That often,
But it is Brits that liberated, not Canadians, even though they're attached to the Canadian 2 Corps.
Yeah. And 79th Armoured Division are also peppered through all this with their specialised armour.
Yep.
Canadians then take Groningen, Otterlo, and they sweep west and north. And what's interesting about this is you have these pockets of Germans hanging on all over, don't you? And 2nd SAS are involved in a lot of this, aren't they, as well?
Yes. Well, of course, this is where Paddy Mayne gets his disputed. He gets his 4th DSO, which could have been a VC. And Operation Amherst, the Canadian Second Corps, they push north to liberate the different bits of Holland that are still held by the Nazis. Because after all, we've had the business of the Hunger Winter to deal with as well. Yeah. 30,000
die.
Yeah. Starvation and illness.
Deliberate starvation.
Yeah.
I mean, what's interesting as well is that resistance to the Germans from within the Wehrmacht. On Texel, and I trained to parachute on Texel.
Did you?
Years ago. And it really is one of those sort of fingers of land. It's in right on the Dutch coast, sort of, you go up it, water on either side sort of place, It feels very isolated. And there's an uprising there of the Georgian Legion, Osttruppen, who rebel on the 5th of April.
Yeah, amazing story this, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely incredible. But you also think...
2-week battle!
What are the Germans doing? I mean, all right, fine, go. Become displaced.
So 565 Georgians get killed, 120 civilians get killed, and 800 Germans! All just so pointlessly.
Yeah.
I also quite like the fact that French paras are involved.
Yes.
They're dropping into parts of Friesland and Drenthe. Yeah. And they capture the Stokers-Verlaat Bridge, which is a sort of, the door that leads into this whole area. So, and then at the very end of April, of course, in Holland, you've got the humanitarian food drops. Operation Manna by the RAF and Chow Hound by the US Army Air Force. So this 11,000 tons of food are dropped in 10 days between the 29th of April and the 7th of May. And there's also a ground operation as well, Faust, which sees 200 Allied trucks delivering to a relief column to the town of Regan, which is behind German lines and which has only been agreed with the authority of Arthur Seyss-Inquart, who's also got an eye to the post-war world, but it's not going to do him any good because he gets executed, doesn't he? Well,
Beetle Smith, there's that account, isn't there, where the Beetle says, Seyss-Inquart says, well, that prospect leaves me cold. And the Beetle says, yeah, it tends to leave people cold, meaning you're going to the gallows, mate.
Yeah.
The thing is that's all like this rolling battle of German capitulation, isn't it? And what's the point of any of it?
But lots of little sort of stands and blowouts. I mean, the Paddy Mayne VC action is quite interesting because what happens is, they're beetling along in their jeep supporting the Canadians as they're pushing northwards. They're going, it's just on that bit where the Dutch border stops and you get into
Schleswig-Holstein.
Exactly, Schleswig-Holstein. So it's that kind of neck of the woods, and they're going along in the jeep, and the jeeps, and the first jeep gets shot up by a little ambush. So there's a little flurry of little farm buildings on the right hand side, and then just beyond there's a small kind of wood. They're being shot at from the wood, but also from the farm buildings, and they get shot up, and the survivors jump out and hide in a ditch. And Paddy Mayne goes forward and clears the first house with a Bren gun. Then the second house completely clears it. He's got one person giving a little bit of cover. Then he goes back, gets into a jeep, gets a volunteer who's a lieutenant that's been promoted through the ranks. And they just main driving and the lieutenant whose name I can't remember in manning the Vickers guns. They just burn past the wood, just spraying it. And they do a couple of runs on that. And that's what he's recommended the VC for.
But I mean, what's the point if you're the Germans? The Allies are over the Rhine.
There's no point whatsoever. Okay, so you've ambushed a handful of jeeps at the top of a column. I mean, do you think that's it? Do you think that's all you're going to have to deal with?
Exactly.
24 sort of badly trained Fallschirmjäger in a wood in a farmhouse. I mean, put your hands up, just surrender. It's just it's hopeless.
Yeah. Anyway.
Anyway, and then on the 11th of April, the US Ninth Army reaches the Elbe, the River Elbe, which is a sizable river which runs from sort of Magdeburg and goes down Wittenberg, as in Martin Luther and that's where he hammers the...
Lovely town, that.
Lovely town, that. Yeah. You still go to Martin Luther's house. Anyway, that's the line. And Tangermünde is the only bridge that's left open. And that's been destroyed, but there is a walkway across it. So German troops are trying to flee across from the Russians and get across. But anyway, they reach the Elbe. Meanwhile, the Southern Reich, it's just chaos. It's absolute chaos. It's just huge movement of people, retreating German troops, fleeing Nazis, liberated prisoners, displaced persons, refugees. On the 2nd of May in 1945, in Oberammergau, US troops from the, I think it's the 3rd Infantry Division, the Rock of the Marne, they capture 3 figures of the Nazi rocket program. So this is Dr. Herbert Wagner, Dr. Werner von Braun, we've all heard of him.
Yeah.
Behind the rockets, behind the ME-262 and the V2s and all the rest of it. And General Walter Dernberger. And Walter Dernberger is the general in charge of the whole project. And they've come from Peenemünde.
Yeah.
They're fleeing, and they've managed to make their way down into Southern Reich. They're quickly taken to Paris, and this is part of Operation Paperclip.
Yes, Operation Paperclip. We're all about flying saucers and teleportation devices and German
0 point.
0 point and German moon lasers
and Foo Fighters.
And Foo Fighters and so on. I mean, isn't it enough that the Americans got a bloke who could send them to the moon? Why do we need flying saucers as well?
They've also got these V2s, and they've got all these. The heads of the V2s are equipped with Taban nerve gas.
Yes, that's right.
Sarin comes from it.
Yeah.
And they're all getting ready to fire them at Britain and Antwerp and stuff.
The thing is, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we talked about Kaltenbrunner and Wolf. There are Nazis who have stuff to offer the Allies.
Yeah.
And there are other Nazis who think they have stuff to offer the Allies and don't. If you are von Braun, you probably are pretty sure that you have something to offer. I'm the guy who built the rockets. You're going to need you're going to want to pick my brains.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're Wolf, it's like, well, I've tried to sue for peace. Does that help? The Americans are being very materialistic and pragmatic in their decision.
Well, the truth is that, since Yalta, the Cold War has started, although there's still a hot war going on. The Cold War, the post-war change of global order and the ideologies that those two leading orders are representing are starting to come to the fore. And it's interesting because I've just been reading, a few weeks ago, I was reading Tim Bouvery's book called Allies at War. And he makes the point that his point is that actually it's already a lot of the stuff that the controversy of Yalta has already been kind of laid out at Tehran the previous winter.
Yeah.
I'm not entirely sure about that, but the point is certainly by Yalta, everyone knows where they stand.
Yeah.
Roosevelt is sick as a dog. He's really, really struggling. And it's clear that the Soviet Union are going to be in possession of a large swathe of Eastern Europe, and they're not going to give it up.
Yeah.
They can agree, in inverted commas, to have free and fair democratic elections after the war is over.
Do whatever they like.
But what are they going to do about it?
Yeah.
Before they get to Yalta, this is a slight segue, Churchill is desperate to have a kind of pre-summit talk with Roosevelt, and Roosevelt won't speak to him.
No, he won't, will he? Because he's decided that basically
Britain's a busted flush.
Britain's done, and therefore Churchill's done, And after all, there's a sizable chunk of American opinion that's quite comfortable with the idea that Britain's done, the British Empire's over.
Yep. He is the arch Machiavel.
Yeah, he is.
Roosevelt. Yeah. He's brilliant, absolutely brilliant, but Machiavellian. Yeah. And also, I think he also does have these high ideals, and they don't quite align with colonial Britain and all the rest of it. No. Anyway, the capture of, Operation Paperclip is all about the Cold War. Yeah. And actually, to an extent, that has already started because Paperclip has already been instigated the previous autumn. It's already worked out before.
Cold War or not, you'd still take the rocket bloke, wouldn't you? You'd say, yeah, you're coming
yeah,
with us.
but why are you going to need that? Who's your future enemies? You're already kind of starting to work that out, aren't you?
Yeah.
Anyway.
And the lasers and 0 point and the moon laser.
And the Foo Fighters.
The base on the moon and the Foo Fighters. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Now we're well deep into the Reich. So the heart of Germany's being overrun. There aren't any armies fighting, but there's towns and it's to do with sort of flavour of the local Nazis, isn't it, basically?
Completely, yeah. Well, 5 miles to the north, you can just run through a town and, everyone surrenders, the white sheets are out and it's job done. Yeah. 5 miles to the south, you've got a 4-day battle.
Yeah. Yeah. So, for example, at Aschaffenburg, that's attacked by Major General Wade D. Hayslip's 15 Corps.
Yep.
And it's on the River Main. It's a 30,000 people place. It's on an outcrop on the bend of the river. But there's a big tank repair shop there. And basically, the guy in charge there, Major Emil Lambert, who's an old fighter, basically, isn't he?
Yeah, he's a First World War veteran.
A reserve army officer, and he's basically totally dedicated Nazi.
Yep.
And he runs a reserve army officer school in one of the barracks there. So he's going to fight to the last.
Yeah, absolutely determined to do so. The account of the battle for Aschaffenburg comes in PCA's magnificent tome, Victory in the West, 1945.
Victory in the West, yeah.
Brilliant account of Aschaffenburg. So this is plundered from that, so thank you, Peter. But we thought it was a good idea to have just a little example of one of these to kind of illustrate the bigger picture. And, Lambert's determined to defend Aschaffenburg to the last. Although, as we shall see,
And he drags together everyone he can get his hands on. So it's Hitler Youth, Volksgrenadiers, Waffen-SS, the police, Hungarian volunteers.
Yes, a volunteer in inverted commas.
Luftwaffe people, as ever. And there's 5,000 of them. And Lambert is duly promoted to Festung-Kommandant. I bet he feels great about that.
What does that mean? Puff you up kind of title, isn't it? Make you feel self-important.
And then prepares the town for combat. He receives a code word Gneisenau, which means people get ready. The insistence is that the garrison, there's 3,000 civilians who also have got to resist the enemy on pain.
Yes, I mean, it's much reduced. The 7,000 of the 10,000 have gone, but there's 3,000 still there. and they've got to resist on pain of death.
Oh, God.
And he sends out a signal and he goes, "Soldiers, men of the Volkssturm, comrades, the fortress of Aschaffenburg will be defended to the last man. As of today, everyone is to give his last. I order that no one shall rest more than 3 hours out of 20. I'm sure it's 24. I forbid anyone sitting around or loafing. Our belief is that our mission to give the cursed enemy the greatest resistance and to send as many of them as possible to the devil." And then there's the local Kreisleiter, who's a kind of sort of junior Gauleiter.
Heinmut Wohlgemuth. And he pitches in, "Whoever remains in this city belongs to a battle group which will not know any selfishness, but only unlimited hatred for their cursed opponent of ours. They will know only complete sacrifice for the Führer and the Reich. Day and night we will work, we will commit all our power to do the opposition the greatest possible damage, because we know that Germany will live if we are prepared to give our lives." I mean,
total bollocks, isn't it?
Cobblers, isn't it?
Yeah. Absolute twaddle. The highest order. And just it's so frustrating, isn't it? Just give up.
Yeah. Especially as the last few episodes we've been making kind of clear that the Allied armies are now very, very good at what they do.
Yes.
They've really got it all figured out. And what they do is if they don't like the cut of your jib, they will shell you into oblivion.
Yes. And it may surprise you to know this is exactly what happens to Aschaffenburg. So it's attacked by the 157th Infantry of the 45th Thunderbirds. This is Felix Sparks's mob. They attack on the 28th of March, and of course it turns into a horror show. Infantry is initially repulsed. They're not expecting it to be so heavily defended. So they pull back and they go, "Okay, boys, do your worst."
That's what you want.
Artillery. Yeah. So they end up no less than 12 artillery battalions and 4.2-inch mortars. 5,000 shells are fired onto Aschaffenburg on the 29th of March alone. Then just to kind of really ram the point home, they then bring the long toms up, which is 155 millimeters, 8-wheeled big boys.
Yeah.
Napalm is used on the 1st of 2nd of April, dropped by P-47s. Over 100 tons of bombs in addition to the shelling is dropped on Aschaffenburg. And let's face it, by the end of it, there's not much left.
Yeah.
Town is eventually taken on the 3rd of April. And surprise, surprise, Lambert doesn't commit suicide. He's captured, and then Felix Sparks insists he sits on the front of a jeep telling everyone to surrender. When the GI do finally kind of clear the town, they find loads and loads of Germans, troops and civilians, swinging from lampposts with placards around their necks going, "Tod allen Verrätern," which is death to all traitors. It's just unbelievable, isn't it?
It's the bitter punchline that these guys don't then kill themselves at the end of all this. It happens again and again and again.
Yes, it's like Field Marshal Schirner. Do you remember at the end? Well, maybe we'll come on to him in subsequent episodes, but absolute bastard. And then flees.
Yes, yeah. And in Breslau as well, the Gauleiter there. This is what the military fighting is like inside Germany.
Yep.
But the other big feature, of course, of the end of the war in Germany, at the end of the war in West, is discovering the camps inside the Third Reich. Yep. And we'll be looking at these, and particularly one as an example after the break. So we'll see you in a tick.
This episode is brought to you by the Nissan Armada Pro 4X. With a twin-turbo V6 engine ready to propel your adventures, up to 8,500 pounds of towing capacity to haul all your favorite toys and space for 8 passengers. Nissan's most powerful car yet will chew up and spit out anything you throw at it. Learn more about the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada at nissanusa.com. Towing capacity varies by configuration. See Nissan Towing Guide and Owner's Manual for additional information. Always secure cargo.
Are you still quoting 30-year-old movies? Have you said cool beans in the past 90 days? Do you think Discover isn't widely accepted? If this sounds like you, you're stuck in the past. Discover is accepted at 99% of places that take credit cards nationwide. And every time you make a purchase with your card, you automatically earn cash back. Welcome to the now. It pays to Discover. Learn more at discover.com/credit card, based on the February 2024 Nielsen Report.
Hey, it's Bill Simmons from the Bill Simmons Podcast. The NBA playoffs are here, and Michelob Ultra is getting you closer to the game than ever with courtside seats and more. Enter now at MichelobUltra.com/courtside. Michelob Ultra Superior Access Courtside 2024 to 2025 sweepstakes. No purchase necessary. Open to U.S. residents 21 or older. Ends on July 1st, 2025. Multiple entry periods. Visit MichelobUltra.com/superior access/courtside for free entry deadlines and official rules. Message and data rates may apply. Void where prohibited.
Welcome back to Weird Ways of Making You Talk. Now, with the kind of fighting that you have around Aschaffenburg, there's also the business of discovering
hundreds of camps.
But there's just camps literally everywhere.
Because there's slave workers, there's enforced workers camps, there's POW camps, there's concentration camps. There's also just vast numbers of foreign workers just wandering around, not knowing where to go, trying to get home, but living off the land. There's refugees galore, and they're hundreds of thousands.
And there's POWs being relocated and also discovered. So there's
and death marches and
swirl of people. And at Fallingbostel, the British discover Peter White in With the Jocks writes an excellent description of when they get to Fallingbostel and they discover all these British POWs.
Which is up between Bremen and Hamburg.
Yeah, and it's full of Powers from Market Garden, as well as lots of other people.
Yep.
They're all immaculately turned out. They come out to salute and all this sort of stuff. But you've also got Daladier, Reynaud, Gamelin, Weygand, all those people, French leaders from 1940 have been in the bag ever since. And I love this, that one Dunkirk POW says, so that's what a Jeep looks like. I mean...
Yeah, because it's a different century, 1940. It's such a long time ago. This is a world without submachine guns and Sten guns. It's a world without rocket-firing Typhoons. It's a world without big tanks and four-engine bombers. It's just a different planet.
Yeah, and obviously this is a massive organisational problem, especially as there's still fighting going on as well. So there's this.
Yeah, of course.
Peter White's accounts of when they take over a farmhouse. And he'll put his platoon in it, and there'll be slave labour working for the farmer. There'll be all this sort of sullen stuff going on and then DPs displaced persons coming through their positions, all this sort of stuff. It's constant churn. The
term DP is coined at this time.
Yeah,
displaced person.
And there's millions of them, literally. And there's the fact: where are they from? How are they going to get home? Where are they trying to get to? What state are they in?
It's the greatest single refugee crisis that the world has ever known.
Yeah.
There are millions and millions of DPs, displaced people.
Yeah.
And people just trying to, now and after the war is over. It's just an astonishing period.
Yeah. But beyond this, though, of course, is the discovery of concentration camps. So Dora Mittelbau, which is
at Nordhausen,
which is where they're building V weapons in the gypsum mine.
Yeah, so this is one in the mountain. Yeah.
One tunnel goes in and goes all the way down. The tunnel comes back out. Parts come back out on a whereaway carriage built as a rocket or a V1 rather. It's the most extraordinary place.
And very, very few workers come out.
Yeah, and that thing of training people to build rockets and then working them to death.
Yep.
The sort of pure contradiction of it all.
Yep.
So Dora's discovered on the 11th of April. Buchenwald is discovered by 3rd Army troops on the 13th. Belsen by the Inns of Court Regiment on the 15th of April, 1945. Flossenburg, which has been evacuated for Death March, is discovered on the 17th of April, though there's 2,000 prisoners there. On the 19th of April, 25,000 ordered to Dachau. Many are still in the town on the 26th of April when the SS disappear. And the Americans, the US Third Army liberates on the 23rd of April. But it's awful, isn't it? Of all these people they liberate, only 1,208 survive.
Yeah.
Because they're in such a state when they're discovered. Oh, at Belsen, the British have to figure out how to feed people, don't they? Because the people are being killed by eating too much too quickly and so on.
Yep. Dachau, the first ever of the concentration camps, is liberated on the 29th of April by the 45th Division, Thunderbirds. Ravensbrück. So executions are accelerated in the final weeks because there's still 50,000 there in January 1945, even though this is sort of northeast of Berlin.
Yeah.
But less than 3,500 left by the 30th of April when they're liberated by the Red Army. So 24,500 of them are sent on a death march, and hardly any of them survive. Then there's Sachsenhausen, which is mainly Soviet prisoners. Only 3,400 inmates left when they're liberated by the Red Army of Rokossovsky's First Belarusian Front on the 22nd of April. So that's just to name a few, but there are many more. But we thought we'd focus on one particular, and we mentioned it right at the front of the quote at the front, and that's Gunskirchen. But we also wanted to tell one story because otherwise, you know, there's so many people. How do you kind of illustrate the experience?
How do you stop them being statistics?
How do you stop them being statistics?
Yeah, all of this has been statistics so far.
Yeah, so the person we're going to follow is a chap called Hugo Grin, who anyone who used to wake up and listen to the Radio 4 Today programme back in the day will recognise him because he was a regular on Fought for the Day. He was a chief rabbi in the UK, but he was a Jewish boy from Berehovo in Carpathian Ruthenia, and he is born into a kind of prosperous, tight, loving family. Father is a successful timber merchant, and they're part of this really strong Jewish community, which makes up about 50% of the town population of Berehovo.
It's not a minority at all in that environment.
No. So it's like an absolutely integrated part, and they're living really very happily, and it's all fine. So this is on the cusp of Czechoslovakia and Hungary.
Yeah.
It's right on that kind of disputed bit. And he has a very nice childhood. He's got a younger brother. They're all absolutely fine until things start to sort of turn a little bit in the end of the 1930s where anti-Semitism starts to become rife. Berehovo is then annexed by Hungary in 1938, so they become part of Hungary.
Yes, after Munich. Yeah.
So then there's anti-Jewish sentiment that intensifies decidedly, particularly once Hungary aligns with Nazi Germany. Anyway, March 1944, despite the anti-Semitism, Hungary under Admiral Horthy has been resisting Nazi pressure to prosecute the Jews in Hungary and doesn't until March 1944 when Horthy is overthrown and Nazi German troops invade Hungary because Hungary's been seeking a peace with the Allies. And they go, well, forget that. So they go in, and at that point, this is when it's curtains for Hungary's Jews.
Yeah.
It is for this reason that extra railway line has been created that goes straight into the camp at Birkenau and goes all the way down to the gas chambers.
And I think it's striking that this is all happening at the point of the war where really the Germans should be concentrating on other things if they're thinking strategically.
100%.
And it underlines that as the destruction of Europe's Jews is a war aim of the Third Reich. No two ways about it, in as much as defending France is, or defending Norway, or defeating the Soviet Union.
Yep.
Anyway, what then happens is they're forced into in April of 1944, the Grin family's forced into a ghetto at a sawmill.
Yep. Which his father had owned at one point.
Hugo Grin's father is able to basically parlay his skill into keeping them alive, isn't he?
Yes. The other thing that's awful about this is that his father, Geza, has actually, before this has happened, before they've been moved into this enforced ghetto, he's managed to get exit visas and prepared to go to Turkey. And then he suddenly just thinks, I just can't do it. I can't run away with my family and not the rest of the family.
God.
So he says, we're all in this together and I've got to stick with the family. I can't just abandon them.
Yeah.
But he has had 4 exit visas, and rail travel and passes to get to Turkey. So they could have escaped, but they don't. And then in June 1944, then suddenly, the roundups start and they're put on the railway wagons. They have no idea where they're going to go. They're given, there's one milk churn full of water and there's another one for doing their business on this thing. And it's just horrendous. And they're deported to Auschwitz. It takes them several days to get there. When they do get there, they're immediately separated. And there's a Sonderkommando guy. And as Hugo Grin is getting out, he's holding on to his rucksack. And the guy takes it from him and says, tell them you're 19. Tell them you're 19. And Hugo releases his rucksack, gets down, gets separated. They see his younger brother immediately sent off on his own, severed from his parents, from his older brother, and that's it. And he is taken straight to the gas chambers, the younger brother. but his mother isn't.
But Hugo realizes what's going on, doesn't he? He realizes
really quickly.
the chimneys are for extermination. The two buildings with the chimneys are for extermination. He gets it,
and he is. Although he's only 14 at this point, he is siphoned off. He says, "I am 19," and so he's siphoned off. And they learn very, very quickly the kind of dehumanization, the shaving, the disinfectant. All their hair is cut off. We talked about this, didn't we, when we were doing the Auschwitz series, but he learns very quickly to lie, which he finds very difficult because this is one thing that he's always been taught not to do. And his father says to him, I know I've always told you not to lie, but this is different circumstances. Now the time you and I have to stick together. We have to look after one another, and we are going to have to lie. They manage to get some messages to their mother, Hugo's mother. They learn that Birkenau is referred to as an extermination camp. But after about 3 weeks, they have a roll call and they say, have any of you got any skills? Can you do woodwork and stuff? And because of the sawmills, Gazer, his father, does know a bit about woodwork. And, he sort of nudges Hugo to put his hand up as well. And they put their hands up. And so they're isolated. They're then sent out of Birkenau. His mother is still there. But Gazer and his son Hugo, they are then sent to Liberosa. So they're put on a train again, and actually, when they're on the train, they see one of the milk churns on the trains has Berehovo written on it in short. That's his one connection to his hometown. God. And they're sent there, and they dropped in this forest, and Liberosa is it's sort of just on the banks of it's really close to the Oder, so it's kind of 35 miles east of Berlin. Something like that. Do you know what they're doing? They're building a holiday camp for beleaguered Wehrmacht officers.
I mean, it's absolutely crazy, isn't it? Where the war is at, this whole sort of diverted effort is crazy. They're wearing red triangles, aren't they? Because his father has come up with a backstory about being political prisoners. They've managed to finagle the system.
That's right, yeah.
No one's quite checking.
And they're not checking them they're not labelled as Jews, they're just prisoners.
Yeah. And they learn to conserve energy, to avoid the guards.
So it's really interesting, this, isn't it? So you don't walk fast.
Yeah.
You do everything slowly. You conserve as much energy. You never look a guard in the eye. You never volunteer for anything. The winters are terrible. And they have all these Greek prisoners there, and the Greeks can't cope with it because it's too cold.
Yeah.
They learn when people are about to die because their knees and ankles swell. And it's basically their body giving up. And as soon as they see that, they just know that person's kind of
gone.
He's gone, or about to be gone. They're taking some food back. There's 4 of them. They're each got a corner of a handle. It's like a sort of old-fashioned sedan chair or whatever. And they're taking a big saucepan of food or whatever. And the most sadistic guard, they suddenly decide to attack him and they kill him.
Yeah. They overwhelm him and kill him, hide the body, and then carry on as though nothing's happened and get away with it, which is extraordinary.
Get away with it. Well, he's discovered a few days later.
Yeah.
And there's roll calls and all the rest of it, and people get punished, but no one's actually pinned for it. Later, he's then caught with a spanner. So he's whipped 25 times. And then he's saved by a sympathetic camp doctor who's known his school. The doctor's son was at the same boarding school that Hugo had been at just before they're put into the ghetto. He begins working in the camp hospital under pretense of being a medical student. And his role is as an anaesthetist. I mean, can you imagine? He's still only 15.
Yeah. And you are not a medical student.
You are not, yeah. And then suddenly, on the 2nd of February 1945, they're told, right, we're all out. So 1,200 ill prisoners are all burned to death in the hospital, all shot. And as they're marching out, he can see this huge fire conflagration. And he knows exactly what's happened. And they also know that they've got to keep going because those who fall out of line are just shot and left for dead on the side. They reach the outskirts of Berlin and they then trudge through the ruined capital. I mean, it's just amazing. Lots of Germans watching them and just looking at them with contempt. This is one of the things he finds the kind of the hardest. And eventually they reach Sachsenhausen, which we mentioned earlier on, and half of them die en route.
Yeah.
But he and his father Gazer are still alive. They're still together. And while they're there, they're working on the counterfeit money. This is Kautenbrunner's mob.
Yeah.
Just amazing. And they're only there for a month.
It is all amazing. I suppose that the crowd's looking at them in contempt. What are they thinking as those people go by? Because one of the things that happens as a sort of function of the Holocaust is because Jewish people are starved and kept in rags. Germans are able to point at them and say, look, see, they are scum.
Yes, but they don't know these are Jews, do they?
No, I suppose they don't even know. No, they don't.
They're just forced workers. But
it's just, what on earth are you thinking in February of 1945 as you see a parade of a forced march?
All right, but if you're a homeless person on Waterloo Bridge and you're sitting there, what would you say that most people look at you at during the day?
Oh,
indifference?
Complete contempt or indifference, yeah.
Right, it's the same thing. It's shame, isn't it?
Yeah.
But indifference and contempt is not really difference and contempt. It's shame that here's one of your fellow citizens of the country sitting on the bridge with a paper gut going, please help me.
Or they just don't look, as JR, our producers, pointed out.
Anyway, by the end of February, they're then sent yet another train to Mauthausen. I mean, all the logistics and organisation of sending these people around, they're still being used as slave labour. So they go to Mauthausen, where they're working in a quarry. In freezing conditions. They're housed in tents. What's really interesting is there's one evening where Hugo, suddenly they're in the corner of a tent and he suddenly feels overwhelmed and he feels completely like he's just got to get away. So he says to his father, come on, let's just leave this tent. Can we just go into the woods for a bit? So they step out and go into the woods and a stray Allied bomb lands on the tent and kills loads of them.
What are they quarrying for? Another holiday camp? I mean, this is the other thing. What on earth's going on?
Don't know.
Because after all, one of the things, when we looked at the Holocaust, when we looked at Auschwitz, in those Auschwitz episodes, there's that whole ratio, isn't there, of how slave labour doesn't work very well because they don't work as hard. You don't get the productivity out of these people that you'd want.
No.
There is no benefit in having, whereas if you fed them better and looked after them, you get the productivity you need. So there's sort of the ever-decreasing circles of this.
Yeah. But they can't feed them better because they don't have food themselves.
Exactly. But also because...
So I go back to the kind of original point we made many moons ago in an earlier episode, which is if you can't afford to do it, don't get involved in the first place. Don't invade Poland on the 1st of September 1939. That's the lesson. So on the 13th of April, they're moved again. This time, this is a forced march. No food, people dying en masse on the roadsides. Conditions are absolutely catastrophic. His father is increasingly unwell and he doesn't realise it, but he's actually got typhus at this point, or typhoid, I should say. Yeah. They know that liberation is on its way at this point, but it's just whether they can hold out or not. They are both severely weakened at this point. Yeah. Anyway, we're going to momentarily pause with Hugo Green's story and return to the Southern Reich and actually the US 3rd Infantry Division because, they are still making huge, great swaths and they are getting, these camps one by one are getting liberated, but also the grip that the Nazis have in the Southern Alps is also being loosened. So the 7th Infantry, the Cotton Balers as they're known, this is part of the 3rd Infantry Division, reached Salzburg. And the 3rd Infantry Division, I've always had a bit of a soft spot for them because this is the Infantry Division of Audie Murphy, who wrote To Hell and Back. He's the most decorated US serviceman of World War II. And if anyone hasn't read To Hell and Back, I cannot recommend it highly enough. It's absolutely brilliant. And they are, by the time the war is finally over, they will be the most combat experienced infantry division in the US Army in World War II with 531 days of combat. Having landed in North Africa in November 1942 in Morocco, as we said earlier, along with the 45th Division being through Sicily, Southern Italy, Anzio, Operation Dragoon, the whole shebang. And in that time, they've suffered more than 25,000 casualties, which when you think an entire division is 15,000 strong, that's a lot. So they feel they've done their bit and more than done their bit, which is why Major General John Iron Mike O'Daniel, who has taken over command of the 3rd Infantry during the Anzio battle at the beginning of 1944, decides to ignore orders not to touch Berchtesgaden and send his 7th Infantry into the town. And the reason Berchtesgaden is so important is because this is where the Obersalzberg is, and this is where the Berghof is, which is Hitler's house. It's his main house. It's his favourite place on the planet. And while the Allies are not going to be able to get into Berlin, they can take this other prized headquarters of Nazism, Nazis on the hill, Obersalzberg. It's where Goering's got a house, it's where Bormann's got a house, and of course it's...
And it's a much cheaper win than going to Berlin as well.
It's a much cheaper win. O'Daniel knows that Devers has promised Berchtesgaden to the French, and he thinks, sod that for a laugh. This has been relayed to Patch, who is the 7th Army commander, and Patch has told Mike, whatever happens, do not exceed your remit. Do not leave Salzburg. Berchtesgaden is to be left to the French. And he just thinks, no. What are they going to do about it? It's the end of the war. I'm going to take this. I'm going to have the glory of this. So he calls up...
Jim, is he saying that in a whatever you do, don't do this way? In other words, do this?
No, I don't. I think he's not.
He actually is saying don't go.
I think he's saying don't. But I think Daniel they're so peed off about this. They just think, we've done more fighting than anyone else. We deserve it. Why do the French do it? Because it's not just promised to the French First Army. It's actually promised to Philippe Leclerc, who's the commander of the 2e Division Blindée, which is the French Second Armored Division. Which has actually been an outlier because this is one that's come from the UK. This is free French troops that have come from the UK. Yeah. They've been attached to the US Third Army in Normandy. They've been sent in at the head of, to the liberation of Paris. They've already had their glory. And since then, they've actually been detached from Third Army and they've been doing coastal festung clearing. Yeah, and then they're transferred. And Leclerc doesn't want to be part of the French First Army because he thinks they're dangerous Vichyites. I mean, so there's all this sort of classic internecine battles that the French have.
French stuff.
And Daniel just thinks, why the hell should these guys get it? So he calls up Colonel John A. Heintges. And Heintges is the commander of the cotton balers and is actually German-born, but emigrated in an early stage to America. And Daniel is quite upfront about it. He says, look, I'll tell you right now, Patch has forbidden us to take Berchtesgaden, but I think we should. Are you prepared to do this? And Hein goes, yeah, damn right. The 101st Airborne, and Maxwell Taylor has also told the 101st Airborne to get ahead of the French.
Yeah.
So there's 3 different groups all converging on Berchtesgaden. But it just so happens that the 7th Infantry, the cotton balers, are closest. So the leading patrol is commanded by Lieutenant Sherman W. Pratt of B Company, which is obviously the 1st Battalion of the 7th Infantry. And they're leading their way. And and he says, we rounded a bend and there before us in a broad opening lay the ruins of what had once been Hitler's house and the SS barracks. After all the years of struggle and destruction, the killing, pain and suffering, here, for sure, was the end of it. And they take it. They've got there. They found the Berghoff bombed.
Well, yes, the RAF has got there first, in actual fact. So 617 Squadron have got there first and destroyed it. And so the symbol of Nazi defeat has been brought about by the Royal Air Force, which is
it's quite interesting, actually, because now below the Berghoff is a golf course, and you can walk across the golf course, and then you get into some woods. And in the woods, you can still see huge bomb craters and damage, and you can still see the remnants of the old Nazi perimeter wire, which runs through the woods and, is keeping everybody else out.
To put everyone's mind at rest, it wasn't Band of Brothers, it wasn't the French, it was...
the cotton balers.
No, it was the Dam Busters.
Dam Busters, okay, it's the Dam Busters.
This was a win for Britain, this one, after all that. I mean, had Hitler taken advice and gone there, as demanded by several of his subordinates in the last month of the war?
Yeah, they'd all been bombed.
He'd have been there when it was bombed, right?
He would have done, but because they're Germans, they built huge amounts of bunkers underneath it. There's a whole network of bunkers.
There'd have been a very different fight there had he been there, I imagine.
Yeah, and then the Americans would have been able to... Either 617 Squadron would claim the death of Hitler, or the Americans would have captured him. Anyway. So that is the end of the Berghoff. But meanwhile, that means that you've now got American troops in Austria. And while you've got the 7th Army creeping around into southern Austria and now into southern Bavaria, and actually the French do arrive that afternoon as well, and the 101st Airborne. And it's the 101st Airborne that get up to the Kelstein House, which is the Eagle's Nest. But it is the cotton balers that take the Berghoff. Meanwhile, you've got Patton's 3rd Army going around the northern bit of Austria. And it is in that northern bit of Austria towards Linz that you've got the 71st Infantry Division. And on the 4th of May, it's they that reach Gunskirchen, which is an outlying camp of Mauthausen and a makeshift concentration camp.
So we're back with Alan Moskin.
And we're back with Alan Moskin.
Where we began.
And they're just horrified by what they discover, skeletal prisoners, sort of, completely dumbfounded, out of their minds, not knowing what's going on. There's a typhoid epidemic through the camp. Everyone's ill. Alan Moskin goes in. He's absolutely horrified. There's a Jewish prisoner who falls at his feet and tries to kiss his boots, and his boots are covered with excrement, and he's utterly revolted by what he sees. Moskin can't comprehend it. He breaks down completely, and the only thing he can mutter is, Ich bin auch ein Jude.
I'm also a Jew.
Yeah.
And then in come American tanks. Hugo Gryn and his father, they say that Sheshetianu are blessing. They've been saved, but they've both got typhoid. Hugo's helping other people onto trucks. They're taken to a makeshift hospital at Hershing. And after everything they've been through together to the point of liberation, and they're sharing a bed, his father, Gazer, dies in his arms 3 days later.
He's still only 45.
The liberation has come too late, just too late for Hugo and his dad.
Yeah.
I think I mean, I think it's really powerful to talk about one person in this.
Yes, and particularly from a camp that no one knows about and everyone's
no one's ever heard of.
Yeah. You know, it's the total humiliation and degradation of human beings. And I just finish with this point that when Churchill makes that speech, I think it's on the 18th of June, where he says, you know, if we prevail, you know, we will return to the sunlit uplands. But if we don't, we'll descend into a new dark age made more sinister by the perversions of modern science.
Yeah.
And of course, there's no such thing as Zyklon B as a means of mass execution at this point.
Yeah.
But how prescient that line was. And those are the stakes. You know, he's laid it bare back in June 1940. These are the stakes that we're talking about here. And he's absolutely spot on.
Well, in the same way that there were no Jeeps and Sten guns and 4-engine bombers in 1940.
No. But if anyone doubted what Churchill was saying back in June 1940, you know, nearly 5 years earlier, here in the closing stages of the Third Reich, both Red Army troops and Western Allied troops are discovering the true, utter horror of what Nazi Germany means and what the Nazi regime means. And, you know, if they've all been wondering what they've been fighting for at various times, here it is in black and white, what they've been doing it for.
In the new documentary, What They Saw, the Sam Mendes thing, which is interviews with two of the AFPU guys who at the discovery of Belsen, with their interviews over the footage that they shot there. In amidst the footage, there's a gunnery sergeant. Oh, I'm from Chester. He says, and the things I've seen, I now know what I was fighting for.
Right,
what I've seen here beggars belief.
Yep.
And he's holding the microphone, you know, like to one side, clutching the microphone. And he looks purely angry, that this guy, appalled. There's a couple of people saying this stuff right then and there, not in the interviews, because in the interviews they're reflecting on 20 years later, these interviews that the IWM did. They're shooting people then and there at Belsen saying exactly this. And I think, you're absolutely right. Churchill's prediction, unfortunately, he was right.
Obviously, there's been all those leaks about what's been going on in the death camps, and, you know, certainly at the higher levels of the Allied command, they know about it, or
Tommy
they've got an
Atkins
inkling
doesn't
of it.
know.
But Tommy Atkins doesn't know, and you know, that's why when American troops turn up at Dora Mittelberg, or British troops turn up at Belsen or wherever, they are absolutely horrified. I mean, they're so shocked at what they're seeing. They cannot believe that fellow man can do this to fellow man, and yet here it is. You know, everyone's just repulsed by it. And, you know, you're right. It's good to have one story, because Hugo Grinn's story could be anyone else's. He's the lucky one. He survives. But, I mean, what a tragedy. I mean, his mother survives, actually. Mother does survive. But his younger brother, Gabby, and his father, Gazer, don't. Plenty of his, almost all the rest of his other family don't. So his father made that incredible decision not to flee and abandon the rest of his family, but it's all to naught because the rest of the family get killed.
But nobody leaves the camps. That's the thing from the end of the Auschwitz series, that no one leaves one way or another. Thanks, everyone, for listening. We will be coming on in our next episodes to the business of the surrenders as they unfold.
The fall of Berlin.
And the fall of Berlin. Thanks, everyone, for listening. If you want to listen to these all in one go, of course, you know this. Sign up for Officer Class on our Apple channel or become a Patreon member. And even better, come and see us at We Have Ways Fest at the beginning of the autumn, 12th to the 14th of September at Black Pit Brewery. V for Victory, putting the fun into fun. Thanks, everyone, for listening. We'll see you again. Cheerio.
Cheerio.